Bonnie again, with timeless themes, stories from the Hebrew and Christian Bible. Today's a story that everybody should know. It's called the Good Samaritan, and it's actually a story that Jesus told his followers. Let's go over to the computer to start with. The theme today is helping others, and a few definitions before we start. First of all, this is a parable, and if you remember, we've had parables before. It's a story that's told to teach a lesson. Now, this involves rituals, which you may remember are special ceremonies. They're often used in connection with religion, but not necessarily. Doesn't have to be with religion. In this story today, it will be. A priest is like our minister. He's in charge of the rituals in the temple in Judaism. A Levite was an assistant in the temple. And a Samaritan, I'm going to show you a map in a minute of a Jewish group in the north who didn't follow all the rituals that the rest of the Jews did, and they were considered unclean. Remember that word? Okay, here's our map. Here's Judea, where, well, Jesus really was from Nazareth, but he did most of his preaching down here in Judea. Here's Samaria up here. And they even had their own temple because their rules were different. And they were like enemies. The Jews did not like the Samaritans, and I don't know if the Samaritans liked the Jews, but they were enemies. And there was some hatred there. I hate to use that word, but there was. Okay, let's see if we can do our story now. So, this lawyer came to Jesus and he said, I have a question. You know, it says in our laws that you should love God and love your neighbor as yourself in the Jewish laws. And he was referring to the 10 Commandments that we learned way back there with Moses. So he said to Jesus, who is my neighbor? Well, this was a good opportunity for Jesus to tell a story or a parable. And so he did. And he said, there was a traveler who was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. We should have looked at that on our map. It's about 17 miles, and it's mostly downhill. Now, there were some big rocks there, and some men were hiding behind those. And they came out, some bad men, and they came out and they beat him up, and they took his clothes, and they took all his money, and they left him like lying almost for dead in the road. Now, this doesn't look like a road, but that's the kind of road they had there. They didn't have cars, they had donkeys and walked a lot. So here's the path that they were taking, and they left him dying there. Jesus is telling the story, remember. And he said, the first person to come along was a priest. Here comes the priest. Remember, those are the ones that they're like the minister. And he thought, oh, good, he'll come over and help me. The priest walked right on by without even glancing at him. The poor man lay there in the hot sun, getting hotter and weaker and tireder and bleeding. And the next person that came along the road was a Levite. They were the helpers in the temple. So he thought, oh, the Levite will help me. The Levite at least came over and looked at him, but went right on by and didn't help him at all. And the last man that came along with his donkey was a Samaritan. Now remember I told you how they hated the Samaritans? Or the Jews did. But this Samaritan went over and knelt down with the man, and he had some, donkey fell off the path here. He had some things with his donkey, some medical supplies, and he helped clean his wounds, and he put the man on the donkey, and he took them, long journey, and I gotta change scenes here now. So, let's get rid of this one. And I'll put the new one up. So he came to an inn. An inn is like a hotel back in those days, but it was a place where people could stay overnight. All right, let's get the man and his donkey and his back here. So he paid for him to stay there overnight. The next morning, he had to go on his way, but he gave the innkeeper some money, and he said, keep him here until he's well enough to leave, and when I'm on my way back, I'll stop and pay you. Well, the innkeeper must have trusted him, because that's what happened. Now let's go back with Jesus and the lawyer who asked him the question. And Jesus said to the lawyer, now, who do you think was the good neighbor? And the lawyer had to say, the one that showed mercy, the one that helped the man. And Jesus said, you should go and follow his example. And that's a really important story, because a lot of people use that, the Good Samaritan, and they call people a Good Samaritan that help others. Let's go back to the computer for a minute. There was this trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, that 17-mile trip. And let's think about some of these questions here today. If you have a parent or somebody there with you, I'd like for you to talk to them about it, or maybe pick one, but at least talk about it. What did Jesus mean when he said, go and follow his example? What did he want the lawyer to do? What does it mean to be a Good Samaritan? Have you done things that would cause people to call you a Good Samaritan? Are there people today that are in need of help? If so, who are they, and how can we help them? Are there times when we should not try to help somebody in distress by ourselves? What else could we do? Can you call 911? Can you run to a neighbor's house, a parent? And the last one is, according to Jesus, who is a neighbor? Now, of course, I have a song for you today, a new song, and it's all about the story we just learned. This one has music with it, but I've changed one word. It's an African American hymn and song, and it says, I couldn't hear nobody pray, but I've changed it to anyone. So you just sing a little bit louder than the music. Kristen and I'll sing along with you. our last week in Timeless Themes, and it will be on some of the teachings of Jesus. Bye.